We'll have another programme for schools, The Magic Bag. That's at 20 minutes past 11. Until then, our test pattern and some music.
Breaking news this evening, Dana White and UFC heavyweight champion Jon Jones have made their relationship official. Jones and White were married in a closed-door ceremony attended by friends and family. Tom Aspinall was quoted as saying he couldn't be happier for them and looks forward to his heavyweight title shot in 2029.
It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things, that while there is infection and disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humour. Nothing can give you that holiday feeling quite like the words of famous racist and adulterer Charles Dickens, the man who banished his wife to the spare room so he could bang her sister. And when he heard eyewitness reports from native Inuits about how the Franklin expedition had become frozen in the Arctic sea ice and resorted to cannibalism, he wrote an entire play about how all Inuits were lying, murdering cannibal savages who probably used arcane magic to freeze the ships in place and then killed and ate all those brave English sailors. Think about that when you're watching Muppets Christmas Carol. Anyway, as the expiration date for 2024 rapidly ticks down, it's once again time to recap the top, bottom and switch stories from the world of combat sports for the year that was 2024. But first, a requiem for those of us who vanished into the long quiet in 2024.
Hoshiwa, puchi puchi gumi iri baba sapa butcho. Hoshiwa,
butcho, ユンハ味覚と
butcho chodai.
January arrived as it always does, with a frigid sigh. As the last vestiges of Christmas were being swept away to make room for the new year, New Year's Day brought us one last unexpected present. Holding a glass of wine bigger than his own head, Conor McGregor announced his return to the world of professional fisting in a bizarrely theatrical manner.
Ladies and gentlemen, a happy new year to you all.
I'd like to announce the return date for myself, the notorious Conor McGregor, for the greatest comeback of all time. It will take place in Las Vegas for International Fight Week on June the 29th. Come a little closer. And the opponent, Michael Chandler. And the weight, Mr. Chandler, 185 pounds.
Cool.
Despite the fact that Conor made this announcement from a dinner table that looked like it had been ravaged by locusts and with a belly full of wine, Chandler, assured that he had finally secured a substantial payday, called up his wife and told her to break out the red panties so that he could put them on and get screwed by Conor for the next 6 months. UFC featherweight Bryce Mitchell revealed that the knockout loss he suffered at UFC 296 in December had been so severe, his family and friends thought he had been killed in the octagon. Fortunately, Mitchell survived, but was left with a debilitating condition known as Eddie Bravo syndrome.
Let me tell you something right now, Bisping. Gravity ain't real. You know what?
Mitchell spent the remainder of 2024 being wheeled out for podcast appearances as a cautionary tale of what daily life is like for someone with a skull filled with packing peanuts and wet newspaper.
You ever heard the song Twinkle Twinkle Little Star? They wrote that back a long time ago. The sun and the stars are different. The sun will never twinkle. It is not a star. And that's what I'm telling you NASA is. It is demonic.
And I knew when I was 16 that our government orchestrated 9/11 and brought them towers down.
The Big Bang, that was created by a Catholic priest, not an actual scientist.
NASA Administrator Bill Nelson suggested Josh Emmett knock Mitchell out again to see if it would return any of the lost brain functions, and because, quote, it would be really funny.
You want to tell me you don't believe in God because there's no evidence? Give me the proof of gravity.
January saw the announcement that Francis Ngannou would continue his hot streak of bag fumbling and return to the world of professional boxing for another multi-million-dollar payday. Only 3 months after losing a razor-close decision to Tyson Fury, Francis announced his next 2 opponents would be Anthony Joshua in boxing and Dana White in the press.
Francis isn't a good guy. Plays the good guy. I don't understand the language, and so he seems like he's a nice guy. He's not.
In other Dana White news, it was a rocky start to 2024 for MMA's hottest new couple, Jon Jones and Dana White. Newly unsealed court documents revealed the extent of Dana's contempt for Jones in the formative years of their relationship. Dana and former UFC owner Lorenzo Fertitta had discussed their disdain for Jones and the best way to screw him over in contract negotiations.
Oh, what's up with Jones? Did he straighten up or is he still being a scumbag?
Still a douche, but we're inching closer.
Awesome. Fuck that punk Lorenzo. He needs to know we don't need him, or he will fuck us over more than he already does.
Further court transcripts revealed Dana had called Jones, quote, a scumbag in life, to which the judge replied, no lies detected. January also saw the announcement of a big signing for the UFC women's bantamweight division, both literally and figuratively.
Hawley will be taking on the only person in US history to win back-to-back Olympic gold medals in judo. The UFC has officially signed Kayla Harrison.
Olympic gold medalist, PFL champion, and bigger unit than a Terran battlecruiser, Kayla Harrison finally joined the UFC after years of crushing more cans than a recycling plant in the PFL. Her debut was set for UFC 300 versus Holly Holm, and the biggest question around her debut was, which limb was she going to have to amputate to cut down to 135 pounds? January also gave us our first glimpse into the cursed Roadhouse reboot. Roadhouse had already been rebooted once and was set to star Ronda Rousey, but once the cocaine wore off and common sense returned, that idea was wisely scrapped.
You must value your daughter.
Stay away from her, you son of a bitch!
But now in 2024, Amazon found themselves with $85 million in need of flushing down a toilet, and suddenly Conor's theatrics at the dinner table not only made sense, but were also a terrifying portent of things to come.
Hey fellas, looks like you're having a smashing night. Doggy! I got a tip for you. Don't let no one get this close.
Come a little closer.
Don't let no one get this close.
Moral arbiter Sean Strickland was back in the headlines in January. After a career mostly known for more shit talk than a loquacious fertilizer salesman, Sean had decided enough is enough, and that trash talk had gone too far, because this time, he was the one being hurt by other people's words. Sean was set to defend his middleweight title against Dricus du Plessis on the 21st of January, in the main event of UFC 297. Sean had previously taken shots at du Plessis because one time he and his coach had kissed as part of a post-fight celebration, which to Strickland obviously meant du Plessis was one step away from cross-dressing while streaming Genshin Impact. Du Plessis was never really known for his trash-talking abilities, but at the pre-fight press conference, he displayed an aptitude for shit-talking heretofore unseen, and mentally 10-7 Sean to the point where he's probably still screaming about it into a pillow till this day.
It won't be enough.
I don't gotta
time
worry
for you to
about finishing.
think about.
Your coach will finish you in the back like you're f***ing used to. Don't worry about that. You're gonna get f***ing finished that night. Your coach got you.
Bro, why are you so angry? Bro, you think your dad beat the shit out of you? Your dad doesn't have shit on me. I'm gonna show you what it's like to beat you. I mean, every childhood memory you have is gonna come back when I'm in there with you. Every single one, the one where you lie in bed at night where your dad comes in and he beats the shit out of you.
I will take your f***ing soul. You understand me, you f***ing pussy? Yeah, you f***ing laugh, you f***ing.
Yeah, I got a nerve. I see I hit a nerve there.
Yeah, you f***ing did hit a nerve, you f***ing bitch.
Strickland was so incensed by this, he went on the Theo Von podcast to discuss the limits of what is or isn't acceptable. He explained that things like insinuating your opponent is into bestiality, casual homophobia, formal transphobia, and basically everything he had said about prior opponents, the entire women's division, women in general, Canadians, Asians, basically just all the people he loved to insult up to and including this moment, everything he said about them, that was all fine. But as to what is off limits, he said, you don't really talk about a man's wife, you don't talk about a man's kids, shortly before taking shots at Ian Gary's wife and kids.
You went out there and you put your wife front and fucking center. You put her front and fucking center. You made her design a shirt. You made her fucking hold the baby while you wear it, laugh it. You put her front and center. You are a fucking cuck.
But it's good to know what we can and can't joke about, because otherwise I was going to end this segment by saying that if his dad's fighting style was as boring as Sean's, then his childhood must have really been excruciating.
Sonic, you're blue and gay. Knuckles, you look like a pine cone that was removed from someone's anus. Eggman, you're probably a pedo. Shadow, you're just projecting the hurt that was inflicted upon you by your father onto those around you. It's okay to have trauma, but it's not okay to use that trauma as an excuse to belittle others. What the fuck did you just say about my trauma? That shit is off limits. I'll kill you, you little...
UFC 297 itself suffered from a condition that would plague UFC cards for the majority of the year, in that the impending arrival of UFC 300 sucked up all the best potential matchups like some kind of fisting vortex. 297 was more top-heavy than Lola Ferrari. Strickland vs du Plessis did all of the heavy lifting for that card, and as such, it was a pretty inauspicious way to start 2024. Du Plessis would go on to win a 5-round decision and become the new middleweight champion, plunging Strickland back into the irrelevance from whence he came. Welcome, friends, to the 2024 Blowy Awards. This year, we'll be dishing out blowies in every category imaginable, starting with a completely new category for 2024. The Johnny Walker Award for goofiest ass way to injure yourself. Thermopylae Team Combat is like someone watched the hallway fight from Oldboy and thought this would make a fantastic spectator sport. Two teams compete in a non-stop, winner-stays-on mass brawl in a rectangle-shaped ring designed to funnel the violence into a head-on collision, and holy shit is it effective. At TTC 2, a fighter named Evgeny Stroik entered the corridor of fisting and took a beating that saw him go flying through the ropes only seconds after the round started. But despite all evidence to the contrary, it wasn't Evgeny that would be leaving the TTC corridor on a stretcher. Seizing his opportunity, his opponent, Alexander Krasovsky, aimed whatever the kick equivalent of a wild haymaker is directly at Evgeny's exposed ass while he was dangling between the ropes. Like a Looney Tunes character kicking a 1-ton weight disguised to look like a football, Evgeny's ass turned out to be made of solid titanium. Krasovsky's leg shattered upon impact. He literally kicked this man's ass so hard he broke his leg on it. So congratulations, Alexander Krasovsky. You are the 2024 winner of the Johnny Walker Award for goofiest ass way to injure yourself. Take a bow.
汗をかいても蒸れない。新しいソフト&ドライ。汗を吸うだけでなく発散までするからさらっとした着心地。気持ちいい。深海的柔軟剤。Soft and dry。ライオンカラー。
Brendan Schaub's entire career could be defined as an attempt to do something cool that catastrophically backfired. Schaub continued this trend in February when an attempt at doing donuts in his brand new $200,000 truck backfired catastrophically.
Starting emergency call to the SOS service provided by the manufacturer. To cancel, press the SOS or cancel button. Starting SOS call.
Our thoughts and prayers are with the truck for a speedy recovery. Sean Strickland was back in the news in February when he sparred influencer Sneako. If you're lucky enough to not know who Sneako is, just know that I am deeply envious of the blissful ignorance you're unaware you even reside in, and it brings me no joy to shatter that innocence.
Who do you look up to?
I don't look up to anyone, bro.
You should have a role model.
Why?
Every man should have or else how do you act? How do you base your decisions?
On what I think is right. Who do you think acts right and who do you think acts wrong?
Someone like Tate.
You think Tate acts right?
Yeah!
Sneako is to Andrew Tate what GoBots were to Transformers, and is mostly famous for campaigning to get the age of consent lowered to the point where he's in danger of tripping over it, which should tell you all you need to know about him. For a man who looks like he has yet to suffer twink death, there's a near fatal level of arrogance on display from Sneako as he attempts to pit his 1 week of boxercise training up against a man who quite literally does this stuff for a living.
You still good? Still good.
That's a nice.
You didn't fall down, Sneako. You didn't fall down.
And I'm not sure what the most enjoyable part of this video is, seeing a grifter like Sneako get fist-pilled, or the fact that Strickland is incapable of finishing someone who does most of his fighting from behind a keyboard. Never one to miss an opportunity to insert himself into a conversation he wasn't a part of, Jake Paul chimed in to call Strickland a horrid boxer who only picks on inexperienced people, a sentence so painfully ironic to read that it makes me feel like I'm being personally gaslit by Jake Paul. In news designed to give Pride fans clinical depression, Vanderlei Silva, a man with more miles on him than the fucking Hubble Space Telescope, made an announcement that was about as well received as a plague ship. In an attempt to finish the job that CTE had started, Vanderlei signed on for a boxing match with Rampage Jackson, and as far as I'm aware, This was the only fight announcement I've ever seen that came with the Samaritan's hotline number at the bottom. As UFC 300 approached, the question on everyone's lips was, who will be in the main event? Jon Jones, Conor McGregor, even Brock Lesnar's name was brought up for a potential main event. With the UFC bigger than it has been at any point in its 30-year history, the main event of such a monumental card would surely be equally monumental.
What's up, guys? I am here in the Honda Center in Anaheim, California, and I'm gonna announce the main event for UFC 300 right now. It will feature Alex Pereira defending his light heavyweight title against Jamal Hill.
What the hell was that?
Don't get me wrong, Pereira vs Hill was a good matchup for the co-main or main of any card that doesn't end in double zeros. But after all the hype, all the rumours and months of build-up, I guess any announcement was likely to underwhelm, but this very much felt like announcing the tentpole launch title for the PlayStation 6 was a HD remaster of Jazz Jackrabbit. February saw Joe Rogan make headlines, as he signed a new deal worth $250 million to keep making his podcast for Spotify. And while that is an excessive amount of money, if it keeps him from releasing any more stand-up comedy specials, I'd consider it a fucking bargain. Women's flyweight contender Viviane Araujo gave her pick for the upcoming rematch between Alexa Grasso and Valentina Shevchenko. Araujo picked Grasso not only to win, but to have a long, dominant title reign, a statement that, as we will see, aged about as well as this cologne advert.
Why do I love you? Why does something that feels so good hurt so bad? Do you love me? Believe in me. Love me. Unforgivable.
The Fragrance for Men from Jon Jones.
In the 90s, MMA was branded as human cockfighting, a label that conjures up images of bloody, visceral violence, of baying crowds exchanging money hand over fist in a smoke-filled den of vice as the blood flies like a gruesome garden sprinkler.
It's real, and they're going at it, and it's men beating the crap out of men, and it's good.
It was a label that took the best part of 2 decades to shed, and was at one time the biggest insult one could levy at MMA. Yet, after watching Dogfight Wild Tournament in February of 2024, I don't think that label is nearly derogatory enough. I think we need something worse. Dogfight Wild Tournament is a Spanish promotion spearheaded by a YouTuber named Jordi Wild. And look, normally I'm pretty opposed to YouTubers getting involved in combat sports like this. It's just a gateway to trauma like Jake Paul's entire resume or Sneako versus Strickland. But you know something? I'm going to give some extreme kudos to Jordi Wild here. Jake Paul thinks that beating up a bunch of geriatrics means he's a renegade who's reinventing the fight game. But Jordi Wild is out here putting on the kind of fights that look like what violent George Costanza fantasized MMA would eventually evolve into. There are 1v5, 2v2, and 1v3 MMA matches, and normally, these kind of gang brawls are just a very efficient way to consume a lot of bad MMA quickly. And that wasn't entirely not the case for Dogfight, but there were some genuinely amazing scenes here too. In the main event, Eduardo Riego fought 3 guys simultaneously, and just look at this shit. Unbelievably, Riego eliminated all 3 opponents in what must surely rank as one of the greatest freak show fights of all time. In non-gang-based boring-ass MMA, Alexander Volkanovski took on Ilya Apturo Toptura in the main event of UFC 298. Volkanovski had a rough year in 2023, with only 1 win over Yair Rodriguez and 2 losses to Islam Makhachev, one of which was via devastating head kick KO. The narrative among fans was that Volkanovski, now 35 years old, was simply aging out of the game. In the lead up to the fight, Volkanovski leaned into this narrative hard and in the best way possible.
Volkanovski too old. Don't make a headline out of anything these days, huh? It's ridiculous. All this talk about the over 35 curse, it's nonsense. So I've let the sports bet crew in. Shoes off, shoes off. To prove I'm just as youthful as these whippersnappers. Like licorice? Nah, I'm good. Usually a hit. Yeah, every time I think of hanging up the gloves, this damn phone rings. It's always Dana. We want you to headline this next main card. This will be him now. Watch. Dana. Who? Taxation office. My credit card details are 9036.
It's a scam. Hang up.
Well, that's the thing?
He even turned up to the press conference in Old Man Volkanovski cosplay, which honestly was probably one of the best press conference moments of all time. It would, however, be the only positive moment of UFC 298 for Volkanovski. Ilia Apturo Topturo knocked him out cold in the second round and became the new UFC featherweight champion. And as February came to a close, Tony Ferguson stated, "Fuck retirement," and that he planned to fight until, quote, "the wheels fell off." After 7 back-to-back losses as of February, Tony's career was so bereft of wheels, it may as well have been a fucking hoverboard.
Global war has begun. Isn't this fun, everybody? Humans are killing humans. This is us. Our time has come! Goodbye, everyone!
March began with both UFC 299 and the return of Francis Ngannou to the world of boxing, both taking place barely a week into the month. 299 was probably about as good a card as we could have hoped for given the impending arrival of UFC 300. Dustin Poirier put on a vintage performance against Benoit Saint Denis, and Michael Venom Page yet again failed to live up to his hype with a lackluster decision win over Kevin Holland. In the main event, Sean O'Malley rematched Marlon Cheeto Vera, a fight that felt more like an unnecessary diversion than a true title fight. Far more deserving fighters like Merab Dvalishvili were being overlooked, likely due to his record having more decisions than a high court judge's. Giving Cheeto a rematch seemed like an obvious ploy by the UFC to artificially extend the runtime for O'Malley's alleged stardom before Merab was eventually given a chance to decision him into a living death. O'Malley won a 5-round decision in an admittedly fun fight, but one that felt ultimately kinda pointless, like winning a game of chess on the Titanic. Francis Ngannou has made a career out of beating the odds, from child labourer to homelessness to UFC champion to beating Dana at his own game and securing a boxing match with Tyson Fury. Francis seems incapable of losing, and yes, I know he lost to Fury, but if you lose a fight and still make 10 million, can that really be classed as losing? But Ngannou's boxing adventure came to a grinding halt in March, when he fought Anthony Joshua. Joshua proved that boxing has more levels than Bubble Bobble, and Francis was not on his. In one of the most stunning knockouts of the year, Joshua one-punch KO'd one of the most fearsome one-punch KO merchants MMA has ever seen. Seeing Francis crumpled on the canvas, staring blankly into nothing while trying to will his legs to work again was probably one of the most shocking moments of 2024. While it was a stunning loss, Francis made 20 million for this fight, which means that it's still a little difficult to classify this as a genuine loss. Discussing the impending matchup between Jake Paul and Mike Tyson, well-known Florida man Mike Perry stated that he thinks 57-year-old Tyson is a real problem for Paul. Whereas I think osteoporosis and having to piss multiple times in the middle of the night are a real problem for 57-year-old Tyson. March also saw the unveiling of the official poster for UFC 300. The UFC marketing team were working in shifts on this one, toiling endlessly that they may wring every last drop from their creative teeth. The end result wouldn't be just any old poster. This was a work of high art that could stand shoulder to shoulder with some of the finest examples the medium has ever seen. Rubens, Van Gogh, Vermeer, public urinal graffiti, all were cited as inspirations, some more heavily than others, and on the 20th of March, the UFC's artistic tour de force was finally revealed to the public.
What the hell was that?
As the last of the winter snows receded and spring blooms were lazily waking, an idea that had long been germinating in the fertile soil of Amazon's movie studios bloomed in full. The terminally delayed Roadhouse reboot was finally released, and McGregor's acting debut was about to force itself upon an unsuspecting public.
It's in the bank for life.
And at the risk of turning this video into a movie review, I'm about to review this movie because I've been holding this in since March. Roadhouse is not a good movie. The fight scenes are riddled with more quick cuts than a Whitechapel prostitute and overly rely on CGI. Storytelling is less present than Concord's player base. Gyllenhaal sleepwalks his way through his performance, and look, there's a million other problems with this movie, but, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, Conor McGregor is not one of them. This isn't to say that he turned into Sir Ian McGregor overnight or something. His acting is excruciating. It sounds like he had to re-record all his lines in a sound booth and they're being dubbed over the footage. He owns approximately one facial expression which he wears for the entirety of his screen time, but I'd be lying if I said Conor wasn't the most entertaining part of what is otherwise a criminal waste of $85 million. Anytime he's on screen, this movie goes from 0 to 100.
Sandwiches. I'm fucking famished.
His performance transcends so bad it's good and becomes something altogether unique.
I got a message for you. From your father.
Conor's Roadhouse performance is like listening to Lightning Bolt. The first few times, all you'll hear is unfocused, chaotic noise, barely tolerable for more than a few seconds. But the more you listen, the more you hear the nuance, the skill required to make something that sounds like an atonal mess, but is in fact a highly technical piece of work crafted by skilled musicians. And you realize this music is intentionally created to challenge the listener by being almost unlistenable. And I'd like to give Conor the benefit of the doubt and imagine that this is what he was aiming for, an intentionally unwatchable performance, one that challenges the viewer and means only true adherents of the medium will make it to the end credits.
Don't be silly. Your father has spies everywhere.
Or maybe Conor's just a terrible actor and his so bad it's good portrayal of a gurning lunatic is the only redeeming feature in what is otherwise $85 million that still would have been a better investment if you'd spunked it all on an NFT of Elon Musk fucking a cabbage.
It's in the bank for life.
Flying in the face of common sense, Conor threatened to lose. Former middleweight champion and well-known dickhead Chris Weidman was back in the news. At UFC Atlantic City, Weidman returned to the win column for the first time since 2020, and his opponent, Bruno Silva, returned to an ophthalmologist after Weidman spent the majority of the fight with his fingers lodged in Silva's skull like a human bowling ball. Weidman, already much despised for the time he took a victory lap around the octagon after shattering Anderson Silva's leg in 2014, joyfully celebrated his win over Bruno Silva via a series of stunning eye pokes. After landing multiple egregious fingers straight into Silva's eyeballs, Weidman finished the fight with, no joke, a fucking 1-2 eye poke combo. Post-fight, Chris thanked his Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ for helping him blind a man for a cash prize, and Jesus thanked Chris Weidman for giving him another blind person to cure. Welcome back, friends, to the 2024 Blowy Awards. For our second award of the night, we'll be giving someone a blowy in the category of the Lifetime Achievement Award for Best Way to Win a Fight Like a Complete Dickhead. Since 2014, no one has quite encapsulated the essence of winning a fight in a manner that would bring shame on your ancestors, yet acting like you just scored an electric wind god fist KO, quite like Chris Weidman. After watching Anderson Silva's legs snap like a dead twig in a drought, Weidman chose to celebrate like he'd just beaten Halo 2 on Legendary difficulty, and after plucking the eyeballs from Bruno Silva's sockets like a starving crow at a gallows, Weidman was in an equally exuberant mood. The Chris is now the owner of two of the worst wins in UFC history, yet, like a toddler shitting on a sheepskin rug, he seems blissfully unaware of the damage caused and remains ecstatic with the outcome. And for that, Chris Weidman, you are the inaugural winner of the Lifetime Achievement Award for Best Way to Win a Fight Like a Complete Dickhead Award. Take a bow. Bullshit from around the world. World-famous authoritarian bootlicker and chair enthusiast Steven Seagal was back in the headlines this year when he took a break from attempting to legitimize the illegal invasion of a sovereign nation to teach his super-secret, too deadly for the octagon techniques to light heavyweight champion Alex Pereira.
I'm gonna teach him how to punch in a way that's different. It will go through the gloves and you won't be able to see it, and it's much more effective and can even be deadly. Does he have to be filming now?
Now get your ugly white ass out of here.
Seagal took a break from all that sitting down to give us some of the greatest unintentional comedy you'll see this year. Sensei Seagal, without so much as a whiff of irony or self-awareness, attempts to teach one of the hardest punchers in the sport how to punch.
We use this too. And when we use this, very much stronger than anyone in the UFC.
The buffet assassin himself also leverages his decades of experience in not fighting to offer up tantalizing nuggets of fight wisdom, such as "Don't let people kick you," sage advice. But Sensei Seagal was needed back at the front lines, and here's hoping his Aikido is about as effective on grenade drones as it is in the octagon. Bullshit from around the world. As winter released its grip and spring bloomed in full, April arrived and brought with it its time of renewal and rebirth. But not for Jon Jones, who was content to repeat the same old cycle of bullshit he's been on since that time he hit and run a pregnant lady while high. A representative from drug-free sport, the UFC's replacement for USADA, arrived at Jones' Transylvanian castle to take a urine sample. When Jones had difficulty providing one, the tester suggested a blood sample instead. Jones was so incensed by this that a chill wind howled through his castle, extinguishing the nearby candles and plunging the room into darkness. Jones, rising up to his full height, his high-necked cape whipping in a frenzy behind him, his baleful eyes, glaring red like pits of hell in the near-total darkness, seemed to dominate the drug tester's vision to the point where only he existed and everything else in the room, save for the smell of must and damp, ceased to be. With an overpowering scent of alcohol emanating from his carrion mouth, Jones' spindly fingers plucked the phone from the tester's hands, and with his pallid face practically nose to nose with hers, he hissed,
"Do you know what happens to people who come to my house? They end up dead."
But thankfully for Jones, his murderous threats would be swallowed in the news cycle by the arrival of UFC 300. It's easy to be cynical about modern-day UFC. Hell, I've made a career on YouTube out of it. It's an era where it seems like fighters spend more time on podcasts than in the octagon. Your calendar is stuffed to bursting point with forgettable Apex cards. Fighters are courting dictators. Dana has turned the organization into a mouthpiece for his politics. The biggest star the company has is a rapist. And as Jon Jones pens another dissertation on why Tom Aspinall, the interim title holder, doesn't deserve a title shot, the days of the best fighting the best seem to have disappeared with the Just Bleed guy. Amidst all this cynicism, when the main card for UFC 300 was announced, I'll admit I was not exactly enthused by the lineup, but I'm also the first to admit when I'm wrong, and I was wrong about 300. The event delivered in almost every way imaginable. Yeah, there were a few duds on the card, and I'm still baffled at their decision to make Bo Nickel versus an Uber driver the main card opener, but from the prelims to the main event, 300 was still, at the time of writing, the best card the UFC has produced this year. Even the mild disappointment of Hill v Pereira as the main event completely evaporated when Pereira produced not one but two meme-worthy moments in the fight. Early in the first round, Alex took a low blow, and as Herb Dean stepped in to pause the action, Alex, without even looking in his direction, nonchalantly waved him off, as if to say, "I'll worry about my balls once I've severed this man's divine light." Seconds later, Hill was a twitching heap on the canvas, and Pereira produced his second meme-worthy moment of the fight with this iconic image. 300 was wall-to-wall memorable moments, the Pereira memes, Muscle Mommy Harrison making a statement when she demolished Holly Holm, or Jim Miller being the only man to fight at UFC 100, 200 and 300, but there was one moment that stood head and shoulders above the rest. Max Holloway vs Justin Gaethje was a stark reminder for many as to why they began watching this sport in the first place. Gaethje and Holloway fought for exactly 24 minutes and 59 seconds. Had the fight gone to a decision, no one would have walked away disappointed from that fight. No one but Max Holloway. With 10 seconds to go in the final round, the prospect of a decision victory wasn't good enough for Max Holloway. And so, he pointed to the canvas, his universal shorthand for "let's brawl." For the last 10 seconds of the fight, the two stood in the center of the octagon, and as 10 seconds stretched into an eternity, everything else became so much static. The lights, the cameras, even the thunderous ocean of screaming voices fades until there is just the sound of pounding blood in your ears and the man across from you. And with 1 second left, Max Holloway landed a shot that will endure in countless highlight reels in perpetuity. The official verdict: knockout at 4 minutes and 59 seconds of the 5th round. This wasn't just the best moment of UFC 300. This was arguably the greatest moment in the UFC's 30-year history, and a moment that ensured UFC 300 would never be forgotten. Providing the yin to UFC 300's yang, one of the worst knockouts of the year took place at Dynasty Combat Sports 91, when a fighter named Quajon Mensah lost via TKO due to excessive vomiting.
Josh is shooting from a ways out. Yeah. He needs to come in with kind of a combination, and
I've never seen that before.
That's a first.
That is a first.
And as April came to a close, former UFC fighter Paige Van Zandt was making headlines when she returned to combat sports to take on Elle Brooke. In a stunning upset, former UFC prospect Van Zandt was dropped in round 1 by Brooke, who is, with all due respect, more well known for her extracurricular activities on OnlyFans than her boxing. The fight went to a decision and was ruled a split draw. Brooke herself summed up the ridiculousness of this situation when she commented on an Instagram post, "Her fall off needs to be studied, from UFC to fighting me. But rest easy, Van Zandt fans, because I'm sure that's the lowest point her fighting career will hit this year. I'm sure that's the lowest." If the months prior to UFC 300 were starved for good cards, then the months post 300 were a full-on famine. The first sign that the UFC may have wanked itself dry came with UFC 301 Pantoja vs Erceg, a card that couldn't even qualify as top heavy. With all intended disrespect, Pantoja v Erceg as a main event was the MMA equivalent of getting socks for Christmas. I mean, yeah, you need them, but no one's ever excited to actually get them. The entire month of May genuinely felt like a hangover from UFC 300. The UFC's output was either boring or inconsequential, and the biggest fight of the month was outside of the realm of MMA, when Alexander Usyk beat Tyson Fury. Other than that, let's see. We got a first look at 52-year-old Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson playing a 27-year-old Mark Kerr, which looks less like Mark Kerr and more like a police sketch of Mickey Rourke in The Wrestler described by a drunk. Dana White got a FedEx driver fired when he posted a video he recorded of the driver throwing packages.
FedEx, we'll get your shit there, but we'll fuck it up.
And to cement just how desperately sad a month this was for combat sports news, we also got our first indication that the time for Shiva, Destroyer of Worlds, to return and reset the universe was at hand when Jake Paul and Mike Tyson had their first face-off. And that was May.
지금 몇 시지? 어쩜 나 한국말 못하지? What time is it now? 지금은 올레 할 시간. 올레!
Wasting no time whatsoever, UFC 302 arrived on June 1st, with the intent to take the taste of UFC 301 out of everyone's mouth. And in that regard, it mostly succeeded, unless you happen to be a fan of Dustin Poirier, who was choked out by Islam Makhachev in the main event. And in the co-main, everyone's favourite edgy hedgehog was back in action when Sean Strickland, the man who promises more violence than the 100 Years' War but delivers 25 minutes of jabs, delivered another 25 minutes of jabs to win a plodding decision over Paulo Costa. Tragedy struck on the 3rd of June when Michael Chandler was forced to pause construction on the new wing of his house, after news broke that Conor had mysteriously pulled out of the UFC 303 press conference just hours before it was due to take place. With no official reason for the cancellation forthcoming, everyone just naturally assumed that the man who had mysteriously gained 50 pounds of solid head muscle had pissed so hot that the cup spontaneously combusted like a vampire in sunlight. Chandler remained resolute in his belief that the panty night that was promised would still take place. Flirting with the first stage of grief, he said, "The fight's happening. There's a lot of speculation, but the fight is on. June 29th, it's happening." And with confidence levels like that, I'm sure it was fine for Michael to go ahead and put that Bugatti Veyron purchase on his credit card. The red panty night is guaranteed. That red panty night is guaranteed. June saw Nate Diaz face off against Jorge Masvidal in a boxing match hotly anticipated by everyone still firmly living in the past. During a press conference in what looked to be an Applebee's parking lot, Diaz played his greatest hits for the tens of people in attendance, acting like all this press conference shit was beneath him and getting into a fight with someone other than the man he's actually set to fight.
What do you care about, Nate?
Not this press conference, bro. I'm sick of sitting here. I'm sick of looking at it. All of these motherfuckers, I'm sick of looking at you too. I'm sick of this whole shit. I'm done with this whole press conference shit. This ugly motherfucker. Man, I hate to disrespect you, but I'm sick of seeing you too. I'm out. I'm good to see everybody. Peace out.
At a second press conference, a streamer named Neon learned that Diaz can take a joke about as well as a medieval monarch.
When you do get knocked out, are you gonna retire?
Who said that? So I know who you are. That little bitch boy, you pussy.
After Neon joked about Diaz's chances of winning, Nate and his crew chased Neon, a kid who looks like he's yet to grow armpit hair, out of the building, across the street, and into an underground parking lot where they sacrificed him to their dark gods and feasted upon his flesh. Allegedly.
Car, get in the car.
Yeah, let's go.
I'll call Masvidal. Just get in the car.
I'm sorry. Please, I'm sorry!
In other over-the-hill fighters having unnecessary boxing matches that serve only to inspire depression news, Anderson Silva and Chael Sonnen met for a third time in a boxing match. Silva v Sonnen 3 tried to milk whatever drops were left from the desiccated husk of Sideshow boxing before Paul v Tyson could show up and pound it into a fine paste. Doing absolutely nothing to improve boxing's image in 2024, Silva v Sonnen 3 was a limp, tepid exchange that ended in a draw and pounded one more nail into the coffin of combat sports' reputation on the whole. Welcome back, friends, to the 2024 Blowy Awards. For our third category of the night, we'll be giving an enthusiastic blowy in the category of Freak Show Fight of the Year. 2024 has been the strongest year yet for freak show fights, and events like Dogfight Wild Tournament provided a much needed antithesis to the likes of Paul v Tyson or Silva v Sonnen 3, and June provided one of the finest examples yet from World Freak Fight League, where former World's Strongest Man Eddie Hall fought two children named the Nafati brothers. After 3 rounds of literally nothing happening, a frustrated Hall forced some action, and perhaps unwisely, one of the brothers decided to attempt a takedown on a man who outweighs him by the mass of approximately one Ford F-150. Hall powerbombed his hapless attacker before one-punch KOing the second brother in one of the most gloriously ludicrous exchanges of the year. But while Eddie's win was undoubtedly hilarious, Eduardo Riego had fought and beat 3 men at the same time at Dogfight Wild Tournament, meaning that for the first time ever, we have no option but to award 2 winners for Freak Show Fight of the Year. Congratulations, Eddie Hall and Eduardo Riego, you are joint winners of Freak Show Fight of the Year for 2024. Take a bow. After weeks of speculation over the reason for Conor's withdrawal from UFC 303, Conor finally put the rumours to bed when he revealed his reason for pulling out of the fight was a broken pinky toe. This naturally drew derision from almost every fighter on the roster, but none had earned the right to clown on Conor for pulling out due to having an ouchie on his whittled toe more than Rafael Dos Anjos. Dos Anjos had pulled out of a scheduled bout with Conor in 2016 due to having a broken foot, for which Conor had mocked him mercilessly.
I looked at the picture Dos Anjos put up and it's a bruise. I mean, I heard ice works wonders. What do you want me to say? Dos Anjos has a bruise on his foot. Did you see it? It's a bruise. Ice. Ibuprofen.
Upon Conor's withdrawal from UFC 303, Dos Anjos finally had a chance to dust off a tweet that had been sitting in his drafts for the best part of a decade. June also proved that there is no downward trajectory that can't be turned into a vertical plummet when Paige Van Zandt became the highest profile fighter to ever compete in Power Slap, which kinda says a lot about both her career and Power Slap itself. Van Zandt's combat sports career firmly entered its death rattle phase when she pivoted from the UFC to fighting OnlyFans models on Misfits boxing cards to slumming it in Dana White's CTE Speedrun League. But as Van Zandt makes more money in a day from OnlyFans than I'll see in a lifetime, I'm sure she isn't all that upset knowing a loser who dresses his cat up in Christmas pajamas for YouTube videos is poking fun at her fighting career. And June ended with Alex Pereira starting a trend that would continue for the rest of the year when he stepped in on short notice to save the main event of UFC 303. 303 was yet more UFC shovelware, a bare bones card that was relying entirely on McGregor v Chandler to sell pay-per-views, but with that fight cancelled due to Conor's fractured anus, 303 was reduced to sub-street beef status. After headlining UFC 300 only 2 months prior, Pereira stepped up and saved 303 when he fought and defeated well-known Wombat enthusiast Jiri Prochazka in the new main event. Welcome back, friends, to the 2024 Blowy Awards. This award is in one of our most hotly contested categories, the Steve Mazzagatti Award for Excellence in Abysmal Refereeing. At a grappling event called Versus Grappling, a fighter named Sven Groten found out the hard way that some referees got their licenses free inside special boxes of Lucky Charms. After being caught in an inverted triangle / armbar variation, Groten knew he was beaten and tapped out. But the referee was watching a really funny TikTok or something, and the tap went unseen. Groten was put to sleep, but the referee was convinced that he just needed a few minutes of unconsciousness to really motivate him to pull it out of the fire and stage a stunning comeback. He stood there watching helplessly while Groten's opponent finished the job and snapped the unconscious man's arm completely. If only there was something the referee could have done to prevent this. And so, anonymous referee at Versus Grappling, you are the winner of this year's Steve Mazzagatti Award for Excellence in Abysmal Refereeing.
This Christmas, give your family the gift of Punani with the Broadway musical sensation, Stephen the Musical. Sensei Seagal will sing, dance, and fist his way into your soul this holiday season.
In an insane world, it is the sane who is called crazy. That's a quote from Lunacy in the Super Mario Bros. Movie. It's a bastardization of a much better quote from Kurt Vonnegut, who said, "A sane person to an insane society must appear insane." But as years go, 2024 was far more Mario Brothers than Vonnegut, so it seems appropriate. July 2024 was riddled with so many sideshow combat sports moments that any newcomers to combat sports would be convinced that stuff like armoured MMA and influencer boxing was the norm and that UFC was the aberration. To them, the insanity and prevalence of these sideshow events would seem like sanity. If you ever watched MMA and thought, yeah, this is good, but I wish they were in full plate armour and had weapons, then Armoured MMA has you covered. The event held in July of this year was about as authentic a mix of medieval warfare and MMA you could imagine, and being held in Nashville, some competitors probably even had the bubonic plague. I don't really know what else to say about this, other than express my deep sadness that Soul Calibur has been lying to me all these years, as not a single competitor was wearing a battle thong or skin-tight combat onesie. In news that will be comforting to Paige Van Zandt, her combat sports career arc looks positively stellar in comparison to that of Darren Till, whose career fall-off is so drastic it should have anime speed lines on it. Till, who once fought Tyron Woodley for the UFC welterweight title, faced off with a guy called Mo Moody at a fucking influencer boxing event called Social Knockout 3. Despite clicking back 2 whole pages on a Google search and scrolling his entire Instagram, I can safely say I have a better knowledge of string theory than I do of who the fuck Mo Moody is and why he was fighting Darren Till. From the bright lights of the UFC to facing off with a nobody in front of a Doge meme in the space of 2 years, Darren Till's career is genuinely one of the most baffling in recent memory. The fight itself was just as baffling, with Mo Moody quitting midway through the second round after complaining of taking a punch to the back of the head and then securing a takedown on the vastly more experienced Till during a post-fight brawl. And can we all just take a moment to appreciate the clearly overmatched commentator who appears to be commentating both his first combat sports event and his first post-fight brawl.
Oh, a fight just erupted in the middle of the cage. A big fight happened. Oh wow, everyone is in. Big fight erupts. That's not what we want to see.
But no month riddled with corny ass combat sports would be complete without Jake Paul making an appearance. Paul fought Florida man Mike Perry in a boxing match on the 20th of July. Of all the washed up has-beens Paul has faced, Perry was probably the one fans thought had the best chance of beating Jake. By comparison to the rest of Paul's cherry-picked opponents, Perry was only mildly washed up and still relatively young. After crashing out of the UFC, Perry had undergone somewhat of a career resurgence in bare-knuckle boxing, where he had 5 straight wins. Paul, whose last 5 opponents have a combined age of 204, wisely removed Perry's big advantage by fighting him in 10-ounce gloves. And as July came to a close, the main event of UFC 304 saw some guy whose name I can't remember take on Leon Edwards, and I can say wholeheartedly that if I fell into a coma watching this fight, I'd still find a way to get up and change the channel. But rather than discuss the pugilistic equivalent of popping a few Xanax, let's talk about the actual fighting event of the summer, Super Rizin 3. And look, it shouldn't be surprising that the man who made a 3-hour video about Pride is going to try and sell you some JMMA as if it were a fucking BetterHelp advert. But Super Rizin 3 was genuinely one of the best combat sports events of the year. There was boxing, MMA and bare knuckle all in one event. In bare knuckle, Ty Emery, the woman who went viral for flashing the crowd post-fight at BKFC, quite literally rearranged someone's face.
No game plan! Smack bang! Smack bang! Seagal has gone down! She caught her sweetly, she's busted her nose! Oh my goodness! Seagal's nose looks like a Picasso painting!
And Rizin even managed to get Manny Pacquiao to come out of retirement. And I get that seeing the headline, "Aging boxer comes out of retirement to fight man half his age," is about as appealing as seeing citizen journalist in someone's Twitter bio. But Pacquiao vs Anpo bucked the trend by actually being a fantastic fight. This video would need another hour if I was to talk about everything that was great about Super Rizin 3. But before I stop fangirling, if you haven't seen Ashizawa vs Cozy, go watch it right now and then compare and contrast with every single Bilal Muhammad fight ever and see what you're missing out on if all you watch is the UFC's product. August began with, what is now in hindsight, a cry for help that would echo through the remainder of the year, when a shaven-headed Conor McGregor made an appearance at a BKFC event in the combat sports mecca of Sturgis, South Dakota. In an appearance that propelled Michael Chandler through the remaining 4 stages of grief like a maglev train, McGregor chugged beers until their frothing mass streamed down his chin and appeared not so much under the influence of cocaine and more like cocaine had its hand up his ass and was using him like a flesh puppet. As Michael Chandler fell to his knees inside a Trader Joe's, Conor gave an in-ring interview about how badass bare knuckle is or something. I don't know, it was kinda hard to hear over all the rape whistles. The entire spectacle, from the beer chugging to the cocaine-propelled interview, to the shirtless partying with what appears to be a half-naked little person, was like witnessing a car crash in slow motion. If anyone thought 2024 was going to end well for Conor, his appearance at BKFC was a rude awakening. Any notions of him miraculously getting sober long enough to dedicate himself to a training camp and making that December pay-per-view against Chandler disappeared like a dream at dawn. August was a bad month for former UFC darlings. While Conor was staggering bleary-eyed around a field somewhere in South Dakota, his one-time co-star on the cover of EA Sports UFC, Ronda Rousey, made an appearance for a Reddit AMA to promote a Kickstarter for her graphic novel. Why a multimillionaire like Rousey needs the public to fund her vanity project is beyond me, but questions about funding were the least of her worries once the AMA started. Rousey had at one point retweeted a Sandy Hook conspiracy theory video and called it a must-watch. And if you think the internet was going to let her forget that, then hi, how you doing? You must be new here, because that's not how this place works. In the most catastrophic AMA since Steven Seagal's, Rousey was so relentlessly cooked by comment after comment about her thoughts on Sandy Hook that she wisely bailed on the AMA almost as soon as it started. In a surprising twist, however, a few days later, Ronda did actually come out with a genuine apology and, somewhat depressingly, convinced a whole bunch of fans to pay for a graphic novel she could have easily afforded herself. It was heartbreak in the desert at UFC Abu Dhabi as Tony Ferguson continued accumulating more loss than a Gotham City grief counsellor. Tony, a fan favourite who had at one point in his career been on a 12-fight win streak, extended his losing streak to 8 straight losses, breaking his tie with BJ Penn and officially giving him the longest losing streak ever in the UFC after suffering a first-round submission loss to Michael Chiesa. Tony, being Tony, only left one glove in the octagon post-fight to signify that he was only half contemplating retirement. And if I could just take this opportunity to speak directly to Tony. Tony, if you're watching, in the name of sweet suffering Jesus, put down the remaining glove and retire before your losing streak is equal to your win streak and the tattered remnants of joy are stripped from your career forever and leave us with nothing but a stunning series of losses to remember you by. And while I don't want to give Tony any ideas here, I can't talk about losing streaks without mentioning one of the longest losing streaks in combat sports that was finally broken in August. You may recognise felony Charles Bennett from his many viral moments, such as his helicopter armbar defence, or that time he mimed skeeting all over the ring in Rizin. If you're a die-hard subscriber, you may even recognise him from one of the first videos I ever made. Despite immense natural talent, Bennett's career never took off the way it should have, and he became one of the great what-ifs in MMA. As of 2024, he was the owner of a 21-fight losing streak. But all that changed at Island Fights 84, when Bennett snapped a losing streak so long established it had been around since Obama was in office. UFC 305 arrived on the 18th of August, and with it, Dricus du Plessis continued his hot streak of making grown men cry, when at the press conference, he made a grown man cry.
I think Friday I'm going to South Africa, and then the next week I'm going back to New Zealand. I'm a child of the earth, and when I take this bet, I'm taking it everywhere with me.
Are you taking the servants with you when you're going back? Are you taking the servants with you if you're going back?
What the fuck are you even on about? He touched the subject there, because I do this for my family. I do this for the people I love, and I'll fight for you forever, I swear to God. Watch this. Look, I'm a fucking human being. I am a man. I can cry and whoop your ass at the same time.
Du Plessis would go on to successfully defend his middleweight title when he became the first man to submit Adesanya, but it couldn't save 305 from being yet another anemic offering from the UFC, a card that almost completely relied on the title fight between Du Plessis and Adesanya to sell pay-per-views. Proving that absolutely no lessons were learned from that time King of the Cage held an event in the middle of a rainstorm, August came to a close, with Kazakh MMA promotion EFC staging an event in the middle of a rainstorm. Rain poured onto the canvas and turned the whole event into a kind of MMA slip and slide, and culminated with the most ill-advised post-fight celebration of all time. Rolling Thunder watch. I'm a Rolling Thunder girl, till I'm 6 feet under girl. The Rolling Thunder is the greatest method of knockout known to man. It's a middle finger to both your opponent and the laws of physics, and as such, they tend to be harder to find than a new PlayStation 5 game. Every Rolling Thunder is a thing to be cherished and celebrated. This year's Rolling Thunder came courtesy of a fighter named Taimu Hisai.
もらってもバンバン前に来るんで、そこでもらわない。おお、やった。一撃だ。ゴーバは最低。やったわ。間違いなくこの男はスターになる。
See you all for next year's Rolling Thunder watch. Rolling Thunder watch. I'm a Rolling Thunder girl, till I'm 6 feet under girl. much like April in UFC 300, September's news cycle was dominated by one event, the Ultimate Dick-Kicking Championship at Fight Circus.
Takes it like a champion.
But there was also a bit of a buzz around UFC 306, aka Noche UFC. Noche UFC was billed as a celebration of Mexican heritage, and nothing conjures up the Mexican spirit quite like Saudi Arabia, which explains why the entire thing was sponsored by the Saudi General Entertainment Authority, and the official title for this celebration of all things Mexican was Riyadh Season Noche UFC. I guess sponsoring a blood sport is great brand synergy for a country that collects human rights violations like they were Pokemon cards. 306's major selling point was that it was held at the Las Vegas Sphere, an arena more well known for hosting concerts than sporting events. And much like 300, I'll admit I was skeptical about this at first. Ticket prices were astronomical. The cheapest seats were $700 and offered a very limited view of the Sphere screen, which is, the entire selling point of having an event in the Sphere. Nosebleeds were $3,000 per ticket, and premium seats would run you the cost of a good quality second-hand BMW. It was no surprise when, just days before the event, the arena still wasn't sold out, and ticket prices were slashed. The first warning that this event might not be the life-affirming spectacle Dana was promising it to be. If you were expecting Saudi General Entertainment Authority presents Riyadh Season Noche UFC to wow you from the get-go, you'd be disappointed. Despite a $20 million price tag to host the event, the Sphere screen wasn't actually activated during the early prelim fights, meaning all we got as our first glimpse inside the Sphere was bare rigging and a couple of big screens. The very distinct lack of spectacle during these fights had most people wondering if the Nelk boys were about to get $20 million in a garbage bag for their birthdays. But much like with UFC 300, I can admit I was wrong about Saudi General Entertainment Authority presents Riyadh Season Noche UFC. Once the main card started, this was genuinely a spectacle to rival events like Pride Shockwave 2002. The big screen introductions were stunning. The on-screen graphics during the fights were like big-budget Mortal Kombat backdrops, and the ring girls' Mexican-themed outfits changing with every fight was a fantastic touch. It was the kind of spectacle that has been sorely lacking in the UFC. There's a reason why people remember Adesanya's Undertaker walkout, or that time Sinead O'Connor sang for McGregor's walkout, even though she'd be spinning in her grave like a fucking dynamo if she knew what he'd been up to lately. Noche UFC proved that when the UFC actually makes an effort, it's capable of creating moments of absolute magic. There is no greater torment than a glimpse of heaven while dwelling in hell, and Noche UFC was honestly kinda depressing, knowing that the UFC has the resources to stage spectacles like this, but would rather give us the cheaper option of over 9,000 Apex cards per year, so Dana can spend the money on whining and dining some fucking Twitch streamers. I'm not saying the UFC needs to rent the Sphere every weekend, but when a minor league like Rizin has bigger spectacle in its shows than the supposed biggest promotion in the world, then their product is slipping. After seeing what the UFC were capable of with Noche UFC, the funereal atmosphere of the Apex Center just doesn't cut it anymore. The spectacle of Noche UFC seemed to bleed into the fighters themselves, as most of the fights on the card were fantastic, up until the main and co-main. A lot of people complained that these two fights were so boring they ruined what was otherwise a stellar night, and I'll concede that watching Marab hump O'Malley for 5 rounds was about as exciting as the reveal of a new crypto coin, but if you think I'm going to just sit here and let you shit-talk Valentina recapturing what was rightfully hers from the pretender queen Alexa Grasso, you can go die in a fucking ditch. My warrior queen, now restored and resplendent upon her throne, the words of those who said it couldn't be done, the whisperings of the doubters, those words are not for her ears. Instead, they return to fall like rain upon the doubters' misbegotten heads. She treads on gods and godlike things, on fate and fear and life and death, on hate that cleaves and love that clings, all that is brought forth of man's breath, and perisheth with what it brings. Welcome back, friends, to the 2024 Blowy Awards. For our next category, we'll be handing out the least sought after award in Blowy history, the Joe Daddy Stevenson Award for Most Gruesome Cut. At Noche UFC, Irene Aldana fought Norma Dumont on the prelims. Aldana, a Mexican fighter known for her razor-sharp boxing skills and being my second biggest MMA crush right behind Valentina, but slightly ahead of the terminally sexy Shogun Hua, suffered quite possibly the single worst cut in the history of MMA. After an accidental headbutt, Dumont opened up a cut on Aldana's forehead so large that you could practically see what she was thinking. Aldana was failed catastrophically by both her corner and the referee, who in a moment of unbridled, rampant idiocy somehow decided it was perfectly fine to let this woman continue to fight, despite the fact that she had a yawning chasm on her forehead, one that was spreading so quickly it threatened to form like Voltron with the gigantic cut that sat across the bridge of her nose. Aldana was in one of the fights of the year in 2023, where she set the record for significant strikes thrown in a women's bantamweight fight. Her toughness is indisputable, but almost as if she had to prove just how much of a fucking badass she really is, she fought on for a round and a half with a head wound so severe it'll be immortalised in highlight reels and medical textbooks. Irene Aldana, have all the fucking awards. Worst cut, most badass, whatever you want, just take them. You've earned them at this point. As summer departed once again, Conor's cry for help became a full-on howl of anguish. McGregor went live on a gambling stream and put on a performance that made his bare-knuckle appearance look like the Queen's Christmas message.
That big back hook closing the ground, coming over the top and bump. So you're going back into ancient times. It's going to feel like I'm coming in on a bull or a horse or something. I'm coming on some sort of animal, yeah? You come back like the Beatles. Bring the Beatles back on my, yeah? How do you think you would beat Ilya Abturo? I grab him by the scruff of the chest and slap the little nose off him, yeah? Little ding-dong of a thing he is, yeah? Oh, look, yeah, what weight do you think I am? What weight do you think I am? There you go, yeah? Cuba! Coming hot from Cuba. And Tyson, wish you well, bro. I'm going to blaze your cuss for the fans. Stand your base. Stand your base.
With Francis Ngannou's MMA return imminent, Dana figured now would be a good time to put one of the pound-for-pound nicest guys in MMA on blast. Dana decided that the world needed to know what a horrible person Francis really is, and that there's a smell of shite off him.
I didn't like Francis as a person. He wasn't a guy I wanted to do business with, and my boys were telling me he's misunderstood. And I told them, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. Francis isn't a good guy. Like, he plays a good guy. Duh, I don't understand the language. And so he seems like a nice guy. He's not. And he's not a guy I wanted to be in business with.
And you know what? It's nice to see a CEO who has principles for once. Yes, Dana worked with alleged sex trafficker Vince McMahon. Yes, he just put woman-beating drug cheat Jon Jones in the main event of UFC 309. Yes, he absolutely will arrange another fight for adjudicated rapist Conor McGregor, but by God, he's not gonna sit idly by and just let Francis Ngannou get away with not being nice. That's not the kind of man Dana does business with. Fuck out of here, Ngannou. Don't ever let me see you hanging around the UFC ever again. October saw Alex Pereira in dire need of a chiropractor due to carrying the entire fucking UFC for a third time this year. After spending all that money on the Sphere card, Dana had to cut costs elsewhere. and he did that by elevating a Fight Night card to pay-per-view tier. Like the majority of cards this year, UFC 307 was a bare-bones offering that would have rightfully been crucified by fans due to a lack of real star power, if not for the inclusion of Pereira. At this point, Pereira is like a limit break that Dana activates whenever he has a low-effort card that needs saving. In the main event of 307, Alex fought Khalil Roundtree, and this in itself was a bone of contention for some fans who claimed that this was just a layup for Alex. But those people are some fucking casuals who have likely never seen Roundtree fight before. And yeah, he didn't win, but this fight was anything but a layup. Roundtree took the fight to Alex like few others have before him, and even managed to drop the champion at one point. But 2024 is Alex's year, and short of smuggling a sawn-off into the octagon, there probably wasn't much Khalil could have done to walk out of that fight as the winner. For the first time since his unceremonious departure from the UFC in 2023, Francis Ngannou made his return to the world of MMA in the PFL's imaginatively titled Battle of the Giants. Like many, I had hoped that the PFL's merger with Bellator might produce a product that, if not capable of rivaling the UFC's, could at the very least give us a fun alternative. But chronic mismanagement of its roster, and an owner who couldn't even name one single MMA fight when asked what his favourite fight of all time is, meant that the PFL's output this year has been nothing short of shambolic.
Cole, what is Don's favourite all-time MMA fight? So Don, you have a night out, you go home and you're just like, man, I want to watch a fight. What's the first fight you're going to find?
So, people who are doctors don't watch medical shows. People who are lawyers don't watch legal shows on TV. I'm aware of everything that's going on because it's important for business. But I don't want to watch other people's MMA shows for enjoyment.
Ngannou's return was the highlight of the year for the floundering organisation, and I really hope you enjoyed all 1 minute and 27 seconds of his absolute demolition of Renan Ferreira, because it'll probably be another 2 years before the PFL manage to take their pants off their head long enough to put together another fight for him. October saw a fighter named Idris Abdurashidov unleash one of the best head kick knockouts of the year. But unfortunately it was in the middle of a boxing match. It's unclear as to why Idris decided to change the rules on the fly like he was playing a game of the floor is hot lava, but I think I speak for all of us when I say, can we please get this guy a fight with Jake Paul already? And as October came to a close, UFC 308 arrived and compounded many people's seasonal affected depression with back-to-back executions of fan favourites Robert Whittaker and Max Holloway. Whittaker was not only beaten, but had his jaw broken by Khamzat Chimaev in one of the nastiest face cranks you'll ever see. And proving that MMA is a meat grinder that spits out the old to be fed to the young, Ilia Apturo Topturo did to Max Holloway what Holloway had done to Gaethje only a few months prior. Post-fight, Apturo Topturo said that he'd like to apologise to absolutely no one and that the single champ does whatever the single champ wants, before Billy strutting his way out of the octagon while waving an Irish flag. UFC 308 also saw new prospect Shara Bullet Magomedov score a stunning double spinning back fist knockout. While the knockout was impressive, my personal favourite knockout of Shara Bullet's was that one time he saw a guy kissing a girl in public and was so enraged at seeing a public display of affection that he attacked the guy in broad daylight. Shara Bullet wound up getting taken down and losing the fight to a random stranger, so he waited for the guy later on and sucker punched him, then stomped on his head. That's my favourite Shara Bullet knockout. Welcome back, friends, to the 2024 Blowy Awards. For our next award, we'll be handing out the Keith Hackney Award for Worst Low Blow of the Year. Since the women's divisions were incorporated into the UFC, the organization has prided itself on the fact that women are offered the same opportunities, financial compensation, and billing as the men, and never let it be said that the Blowy Awards don't take an equal stance when it comes to gender. Which is why for the first time in its storied 1-year-long tradition, the Keith Hackney Award will be presented to a woman. At UFC Vegas 100, the rule banning 12-6 elbows had been rescinded, and Jillian Robertson was spamming the now legal move like she was trying to make up for lost time. But in her haste to cram as many downward elbows into one exchange as possible, she elbowed her opponent, Luana Pinheiro, somewhere no elbow should ever find itself. To quote Pinheiro herself, she said, "Excuse my language, but she elbowed my anus." Taking an elbow to the Swiss roll is no laughing matter. Pinheiro is still on pain meds and unable to sit, bend, laugh, or ride a bicycle properly since Robertson dropped the people's elbow on Pinheiro's poop. I'm sorry, I can't finish this one. Throughout this video, there have been news stories I have intentionally avoided, despite them being worthy of discussion. These end-of-year videos are an overtly sarcastic way for me to blow off some steam at the end of a long year of writing and editing, and get out all of the stupidest ideas I couldn't get away with in other videos. As such, there are serious topics such as the tragedy of Francis Ngannou losing his young son that just don't belong in a year-end video like this. But unfortunately, there is one headline we can't ignore here, and I think you all know where this is going. The rumours about Conor's sexual assault of Nikita Hand have been floating around this country more or less since it happened. They were honestly hard to avoid. I've heard the same story from so many different people that I even discussed the rumours in the video I made about Conor all the way back in 2021. But now, at the time of writing, they are no longer just rumours. In November of 2024, Conor was found liable for the rape of Nikita Hand. Rightly so, he is currently being removed from his own whiskey label, from the Hitman video game, his shite whiskey is being removed from supermarkets, and God knows how many gym murals across the country are hastily being painted over. However, the silence from Dana and the UFC on this matter has been nothing short of shameful. Their refusal to acknowledge that their biggest star is a violent sex offender is yet another in a litany of abuses by fighters to apparently be swept under the rug, and with each one, it makes it harder and harder to be a fan of this sport, or at the very least, of this company. I envision a near future where the UFC are doing their best to sports wash Conor's tattered reputation by getting him back into the octagon as soon as they can in order to milk whatever money is left out of his name before he inevitably winds up dead or in jail. And just as depressingly, I still see an army of people who would be willing to buy that pay-per-view because they are either unwilling or unable to acknowledge that Conor has been a scumbag his entire career. Conor has not done anything worthy of celebration in almost a decade at this point. Since the bus attack and the Khabib press conference, he's been on an ever downward spiral. I don't think it should be difficult for any self-respecting fan of this sport to wash their hands of him. He's often been called controversial, but there is no controversy here. Saying Vanderlei Silva is the greatest fighter of all time is controversial. Conor was found liable for rape. There should be no controversy about this, only condemnation. And the fact that the UFC are too afraid to speak up one way or another out of fear for their bottom line is, well, it kind of sums up the state of the world in 2024 if I'm being honest. The vast majority of this video had been written long before Conor went to trial. I've been genuinely torn as to whether or not I should have removed all traces of him from this video, but seeing as how he's had such a looming presence over the MMA landscape this year, and as I don't believe I've done anything but make fun of him up until this point, I've decided to leave it mostly as is, with a few edits here and there to address him by his official title of Adjudicated Rapist Conor McGregor, just so there's no room for any doubt as to where I stand on this matter. I believe his victim, I believe the jury got it right, and I'll be making a donation on behalf of the Just Bleed crew to Rape Crisis Ireland. And with all of that said, I'm sure the rest of November will be more uplifting.
Paul versus Tyson, Friday, November 15th, live on Netflix.
Oh, for God's sake. November saw the hotly dreaded fight between 27-year-old Jake Paul and a man literally old enough to be his grandfather, 58-year-old Mike Tyson, finally take place. Like midsummer for dickheads, Jake Paul decided now that Tyson was almost 60, it was time for him to be ritually sacrificed for the good of society. Tyson wore a large knee brace and was clearly having trouble moving. He looked old and slow, but maybe that's because he's old enough to have watched the fucking Apollo 11 moon landing live. Jake Paul, on the other hand, hasn't even lived in an era without Wi-Fi. In a more reasonable society, this fight would have been classed as a hate crime. A fight where barely a punch was thrown between a fraud and a man old enough to collect both his purse and pension on the same night became the most streamed sporting event in history. 72,000 people attended the fight in person. That's equal to the amount of people at Pride Shockwave 2002 according to some estimates. 65 million people worldwide streamed it live on Netflix, or at least they tried to, though I do have to wonder how this farce looked to the casual Netflix viewer, watching a broken down Tyson hobble around the ring, while a man less than half his age very clearly does his best to carry Tyson through the fight and prevent him from suffering a coronary, surely must act as a disincentive to renewing your subscription. It's stating the blindingly obvious to say that this was nothing but a cash grab. This wasn't for legacy or a title or even something as nebulous as honor. This was for Tyson to make an easy 20 million and for Jake to be able to say, I beat a legend. But just because I could do the Macarena on Muhammad Ali's grave, it doesn't mean I've beaten a legend any more than beating the broken down husk of a damn near sexagenarian Mike Tyson does. And November ended with the culmination of a years-long love affair between Jon Jones and Dana White. Throughout the course of 2024, Dana had been on a PR blitz on behalf of Jones. I don't know if this was Dana's attempt to sports wash Jones' reputation, or if he really believes a man who popped for steroids more times than any other champion is the GOAT, but Dana spent the majority of 2024 maddeningly insisting that Jon Jones was tougher than Batman, Superman, and Mayor Mike Hagar combined.
Jon Jones is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, period, end of story.
I consider Jon Jones the greatest combat fighter of all time.
Jon Jones, pound-for-pound best in the world. You throw Jon Jones in a room with anybody, Jon Jones walks out of the room. No matter what you think of Jon Jones, he's the fucking best ever, and he's the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world. When you talk about who's the baddest dude in the world, you put two guys in a room and who walks out, Jon Jones walks out of the room every time. Oh, you little fucking crybabies out there, Jon Jones, okay? Jon Jones, pound-for-pound #1 fighter in the world, and he's the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world.
Jon Jones is the nastiest dude ever.
As an educated adult who knows the fight business, you cannot deny that while Jon Jones is active, he is the greatest fighter in the world. Jon Jones.
Jon Jones.
Jon Jones. Jon Jones. Jon Jones. Jon Jones. Jon Jones. Jon Jones. Jon Jones. Jon Jones. Pound for pound best fighter in the world, and he's the GOAT. And you all know this. Numbers don't lie.
Does he have pictures of you?
After almost 2 years of inactivity, Jones, the pound-for-pound greatest fighter in all of reality and some fictional scenarios too, was set to face a 42-year-old full-time fireman who hadn't fought since being brutally knocked out by Francis Ngannou in 2021 and hadn't won a fight since pre-pandemic times. Stipe Miocic is without doubt the greatest heavyweight the UFC has ever had, and this would have been an amazing fight if this were 2020, but it isn't. and Stipe has about as much relevance to the heavyweight division in 2024 as Tank Abbott. Dana's eternal crusade to convince the world that Jones is the baddest man on any planet capable of sustaining carbon-based life forms was, to my mind, nothing more than a sleight of hand to distract people from the fact that the lineal heavyweight champion was now in the PFL, and that Jones had held up the division for almost 2 years and was refusing to fight the interim title holder. What better way to get people to forget those facts than by reminding everyone Jon Jones is the GOAT with such regularity that it becomes a meme?
Stop riding Jones. Shut the fuck up. Look at the stats, read them. Best of all time, and he is the pound for pound best fighter in the world. Ride that, motherfucker.
Jones obviously won the fight, but this was at absolute best a hollow victory. Celebrating beating Stipe while Tom Aspinall is still waiting in the wings is like celebrating beating the Asylum demon in Dark Souls and claiming you finished the game. And look, I'm not saying this because I'm convinced Aspinall would absolutely beat Jones, because I'm not. I think Jones, despite his age and wear and tear, would still be the hardest fight of Tom's career. And if I had to put money on that fight, honestly, I'd bet on Jon. But Tom Aspinall is the interim title holder, and if Jones wants to call himself the real heavyweight champion, the answer is simple. He must fight Tom Aspinall or vacate the title. Jones avoided moving up to heavyweight for 2 years, and only moved up once Ngannou had left the company. He won a vacant title by beating a guy who spent all of Fight Week playing FIFA. Jon spent all of UFC 309 Fight Week saying that the Stipe fight was for legacy, but realistically, what does beating a guy who hasn't won a fight since 2020 do for your legacy? About as much as beating Tyson did for Jake Paul's legacy. If Jon wants legitimacy at heavyweight, there is only one option for him. UFC 309 was another top-heavy card, with 2 big-name fights and 7 mediocre ones. The best part of this entire fight week was when TNT Sports, an official UFC partner, accidentally posted this meme poster for 309 on their Instagram. And when all was said and done, and Jones had given an utterly heinous post-fight interview where he redirected questions about his next opponent to his love for Jesus and Trump, as always, it was left to Mark Hunt to say what we were all thinking. Well friends, that's it for another end of year special. 2024 has, on a personal level, been one of the worst years I can remember, for myself and those I care about. It's not been an easy year. And MMA has kinda been a mess this year too. We had the highs of 300, the Sphere, and Super Rizin 3, but we also had Jones shitting up heavyweight, the old guard aging out of the game in the most brutal way possible, and the long shadow cast by Conor's trial. But through all of it, I can safely say that escaping from real life shit into making these videos for you guys has been a privilege. And I am eternally grateful to be a part of the Just Bleed crew alongside you guys. And hey, before I go, remember that time I made a joke about a Steven Seagal musical? And that was funny, right? Because the idea is so ludicrous. Like, who would make a Steven Seagal musical? Who would waste their time doing something like that? Who indeed?
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to our guests tonight. First, the band. It's Jizzy Johnny of the Lake City Quiet Bills and the Seagal Fan Club. Next, your host and our singer for this number. It's the one, it's the only, Napoleon Bonaparte. Backing him up on the voice is the ever-sultry, ever-seductive Sandy. And finally, please give an extra warm welcome to the man of the hour, Slimin', Sleazin' Steven. Steven Seagal, ladies and gentlemen, welcome.
Take it away, Johnny. swallow my way there. Don't make me take the stairs with shades and goatee. Stomaching so conveniently, I sit down for my fight scenes, 'cause my legs can support me.
I can't work like this. Somebody get me a sheet canvas. I'm going back to booking.
From Hollywood I was banned. They said I had wandering, roving hands. To the east I would flee. To hell with democracy. But who needs freedom when you've got that show called The Man? It was the best in the land, but they pulled it from cable. When I killed a dog with a tank, the Americans hate me. That's why I call myself a Russian. Now I'm stuck in a war zone. This year's the only thing that I'm crushing.
Hey there, sugar tits. Wanna see my keto?
Tell me that one more fucking time and I'll slit your throat.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Steven Seagal. I was born to snatch birthdays, but made to eat cake. My tough guy act was entirely fake. I was born to snatch birthdays, but made to eat cake. From Ukraine I must escape. I'm a hip-hop fan.
I may have gone too far in a few places.